Good morning, guys, or good afternoon, whether you're joining me from the present or the future. Welcome back to another FutureFight Vanguard video. Happy Friday, guys. I'm back with another video. Today we're going to be covering the FutureFight video. If you read it in the title before you clicked, we're going to be covering the FutureFight today of the Narukami deck from the next set. So, like I said, we're going to be starting the next set in this video. It is the V-BT03 Miyagi Academy Cardfight Club, Club. So we're going to be starting the next set. Happy to be able to start it with you guys. This next set is pretty cool. It has a couple clans in it, more than usual because it is a normal set. And I think it has more than, if I'm not mistaken, I think it has more than the previous first two sets. So it has Royal Paladin, Narukami, Murakumo, Gold Paladin, and OTT. So we have 5 clans because 5 members of the Cardfight Club in the anime, etc., etc. But we're going to get right into it here. If you guys haven't already, be sure to subscribe down below and click the bell button so that you don't have to miss any videos going forward. Be sure to also check out the Cardfight Empire social media down below. I mostly post on the Cardfight Empire Facebook, so if you guys want to like the Facebook page or follow the Facebook page, whatever, interact on there, you guys are free to do so as well. And also, be sure to check out our sponsor. They're gonna be their symbol's gonna appear up below, facepalm, up above me and below and down in the description. They're gonna be Dabbers Cards and Games. They're a local card shop located in Georgia. So they have a lot of Japanese sleeves, deck boxes, all kinds of like little items that you can get. They offer video game tournaments there. They also offer regular card game tournaments, and they have lots of card stock of Cardfight cards when sets first drop at competitive prices. And you can also find those on TCG Player at dabberspro.tcgplayer.com so that you guys can order those if you live out of state. But yeah, check them out. They're an awesome store, and they're great for supporting the community. But let's get right into the video here with Pikachu. Has nothing to do with Cardfight, but Pikachu's just chilling with us today. So let's get right into the video. So I didn't even save it as Narukami. Here, let's do that real quick. So we're gonna save as V-BT03 V-BT Narukami. Alright, so we're gonna go back out, gonna load our deck, bam, just so that you guys can see the title, and let's get right into it. So there's gonna be no G-Zone, obviously, because this is a standard deck, and let's get right into the deck. So starting with our grade 3s, guess I should start off with a general summary, something that I wanted to start doing in the FutureFight Vanguard series because some people were talking to me about it. So a general summary of this deck, if you want to continue the video from here, is that Narukami is an Accel deck, first of all, but so they are a more aggressive deck that focuses on pumping out attacks, but they also focus on binding your opponent's units. So they focus on field control while trying to put up a good offense too with their restanding Vanguard and all this stuff that they have to offer. But let's get right into that so you guys know exactly how to do those. So the first grade 3 that we run in our grade 3 lineup at 4 is Tonics Drill Dragon. The Tonics Drill Dragon skill is when it's on the Vanguard circle, once per turn when it attacks a Vanguard, you can counterblast 1, and you choose a rearguard in your opponent's front row and you bind it. Also, I should mention in this deck that you can only bind front rows with all of the binding skills, and that's why this card right here, Riki, really comes in handy. We'll talk about Riki's skill later, but it helps you snipe off those back rows as well. So when this card attacks a Vanguard, you can counterboss 1, choose a rearguard in your opponent's front row and bind it, and then you discard the same number of cards from your hand as the number of your opponent's rearguards, and then at the end of the battle, you stand this unit. It gets plus 5,000 power and -1 drive. So ideally, when you're using Tonics Drill Dragon, you want to attack when your opponent has 1 front row rearguard and nothing else on their board. If you can get to that point and make that happen, that is the ideal conditions for activating Tonics Drill. Because then you counterboss 1, you bind your opponent's remaining unit on the board, and then your opponent has no rearguards, so you don't have to discard any cards, and you get to restand at the end of its battle, and it gets plus 5,000, -1 drive. So you basically just got triple drive for free. You don't have to discard anything. It's even better than Gear Chronicle, because technically Gear Chronicle in Standard, you do have to discard a card to stride and get triple drive. So, yeah, so potentially you could just straight up plus, but it is still just as good if you have to just discard like one. If your opponent has one rearguard remaining on the board and you just have to discard one, that's fine, because you're still getting twin drive as normal. You're just sacrificing that one extra card that you would have gotten from the triple drive or the drive after it restands. Something else to clarify with this card is that you do discard before the attack. So what I mean by that is a lot of people think that because of how old Vanguard skills work, usually a skill like this would say, when this card attacks Vanguard, counterblast 1, bind a card, or bind a rearguard in your opponent's front row, then at the end of the battle, discard blank, and then restand, and it gets plus 5,000. So the reason why that's important is because if you play down all your cards to the field, and your opponent actually has rearguards, your opponent can actually outplay you with stuff like Neo Nectar, Royal Paladin, things that spam units to the board, Shadow Paladin with their main calls and all that stuff. So things that actually spam call to board can actually force you in the late game to not be able to use the Tonics Drill, because you have to discard before drive check, not after. So what would happen is, like, let's say that you're fighting Neo Nectar and you clear their whole board, and the next turn they attack your rearguards or something like that, or you have to use your rearguards to intercept. Then you don't have that many rearguards. Let's say you have 4 cards in hand, you have 2 Accel circles, so you play all 4 cards down to the board. Then you attack with Tonics Drill. You would still be able to counterblast 1 and bind one of their front rows, preferably an Interceptor. However, since they would have, like, it's Neo Nectar, so I assume they would have a bunch of tokens and a full board. So you would be binding one of their units, and they would still have 4 units on the board, including their tokens. So you would have to discard 4 cards for this card's effect to go off, and since you don't have any cards in your hand, you can't do it. Even if they just had just 1 rearguard after you bound, then you wouldn't be able to do it because you have no cards in your hand. So that is something to keep in handy, and that's why we run more draw triggers in this build as well, because we always want to have cards to discard for the Tonics Drill Dragon's effect, since it is our main Vanguard. Moving on to our next grade 3, we have 4 Tonics Stinger Dragon. This is our ideal first ride, and really if I get like multiples of them in the early game, I'll ride like multiples just to get like, because it's a really good plus every time you re-ride onto it and use its ability. So it has 2 abilities. The first one is a Vanguard rearguard skill, and the second one is like a break ride skill. So break ride, for those of you who are new to Vanguard entering V series, it's basically when you ride a card and the card that you rode upon has an effect from being ridden upon. So the Tonics Stinger Dragon's first effect, the upper one, is when it's placed on Vanguard Circle or Rearguard Circle, you can counterblast 1, choose the rearguard in your opponent's front row, bind it, and this unit gets plus 5,000 power. So pretty simple. This unit becomes 17k on Vanguard Circle or on your regular rearguard circles, or it becomes 27 on your Accel circles, which is really cool because when you ride the Tonics Drill over Stinger, you get to move Stinger to the Accel circle that you just created, counterblast 1, bind one of your opponent's rearguards, and then it becomes 27k, which is really good number to hit on Accel and Protect clans, and it's a decent number to hit on Force. So its second ability is when this unit is rode upon, you call this unit to rearguard, and one of your Vanguards gets plus 10,000 power. So you can see how the Tonics Stinger and the Tonics Drill complement each other perfectly, because first you ride the Tonics Stinger, then you ride the Tonics Drill, and you create an Accel circle. Then you can use the skill of Stinger to call Stinger from your soul to the Accel circle for free. And then your Vanguard, which is the Tonics Drill, now gets 22k, which means that the restanding skill is now more potent, because you get to attack for 22 and then 27 at the very least, assuming that you check no triggers. So it's really good. It forces your opponent into a really bad spot, and just all around good 2 cards to work with each other. We actually do run 10 grade 3s in this build because I like using this card as a rearguard and Vanguard depending on the situation. So the other grade 3 that we run is Great Composure Dragon. So Great Composure Dragon has a Vanguard rearguard ability that says at the beginning of you or your opponent's battle phase, this unit gets plus 3,000 power until the end of the turn for each open rearguard in your opponent's front row. If it is your turn, it gets 5,000 instead of 3,000. What this means is that against other Accel decks, this is a really, really good card to ride because Narukami, since I said that they're a control deck, we run a lot of control cards in this deck that bind cards. So if you ride Great Composure, eventually if you fight another Accel clan and you keep binding their rearguards and keep attacking them and they have to guard with cards, eventually they're going to reach a point where they can no longer, or I guess I should not even say eventually, very quickly they're going to reach a point where they can no longer just play cards to their front row unless they're playing triggers or something like that. Cards that they should be defending with. So they either get forced into a bad spot where they have to A, play their triggers onto the board in the front row just so that Great Composure doesn't get power, or B, they have to literally just let Great Composure get power and keep cards in their hand. So it's really, really good that Great Composure gets power on your opponent's turn as well, because when you're fighting Accel, like let's say that you are fighting Accel, they have 2 Accel markers that they've created so far, and you just clear their whole board in 1 turn. Then you have Great Composure Dragon on the field, and not only during your turn will Great Composure Dragon get plus 20,000, because you'll have 4 front row circles, 2 Accel and 2 regular in the front row that are empty. On your opponent's turn, if they decide to keep it empty, then Great Composure Dragon will get plus 12,000, being a 24k base, and then you only have to guard their Vanguard. So against decks like against other Force decks that are just Vanguard reliant, like Kagura with Waterfall Dragon, you'll get plus 6k, you'll turn into a 17k base if their front rows are empty, because that's not Accel. So it's basically just a really good Accel counter card, but it does help against other things too. Another thing is, I did say that I like using on the rearguard circle as well. For the rearguard circle during our turn, I like putting this card on an Accel circle and then clearing their board so that it becomes at least a 22k. If it's Force or Protect, it will become 22k because you just clear both their front rows and they only can have 2 front rows. But if it's an Accel, it can become 27, 32, crazy numbers like that, depending on how many Accel circles they have out and how many you can actually clear. And then on your opponent's turn as well, on the rearguard circle, it does get power as well. So it is easy for you to block if your opponent thinks that that's like a huge threat on your board and they try to attack into it. A lot of times they'll get power so that it's easier to defend their attacks, or they just can't hit you at all. Moving on to our grade 2s, we have 4 Recklessness Dragon. This card's name reminds me of Reckless Express, if you guys were around in original Vanguard Spike Brother card, but that's unrelated. So like getting right into Recklessness Dragon skill, has 2 abilities. One is a Vanguard rearguard ability and one is a rearguard only ability. So the first ability is when this card's on the Vanguard or rearguard circle, and when it's placed, you can counterboss 1, choose one of your rearguards in your opponent's front row, bind it. Pretty simple. This is our ideal grade 2 ride. Even if you can bind or not, I still prefer to ride this card because I prefer to use the other grade 2s on rearguard circles for attackers. And then the rearguard skill of Recklessness Dragon is when it attacks a Vanguard, if there are 1 or less rearguards in your opponent's front row, this unit gets power plus 3,000. So it becomes a 12k base when it is attacking your opponent's Vanguard and your opponent has 1 or less rearguards in their front row. The reason I prefer using Dragonic Deathscythe and Excess Streak instead on my rearguard circles is because they usually attack bigger into Force without a booster. So they can actually hit Force's 13k base without a booster, whereas Recklessness Dragon cannot. Recklessness Dragon will hit 12 to their 13 and you still have to boost it. Moving on to Dragonic Deathscythe, it has 2 rearguard abilities, so you only want to play this card on rearguard pretty much. If you have to ride it because it's your only grade 2, that's fine, but that's not ideal. So the first rearguard ability is when it's placed, you can Soul Blast 2 cards, so take 2 cards from your soul, move them to the drop zone, and then you choose a rearguard in your opponent's front row, bind it, and this card gets plus 3,000 power. Then the continuous ability of the second ability says during the battle that it attacks a Vanguard, if there are no rearguards in your opponent's front row of the same column of this unit, then this unit gets plus 5,000 power. So the reason why Dragonic Deathscythe is really, really good, possibly the best grade 2 in this deck in my opinion, is because number 1, when it uses the first skill, you can automatically activate the second skill just like that off of the first skill if it's not active already. If they don't have a front row there, your second skill is already online. If they do have a front row right there, you can just Soul Blast 2 and bind it, unless it's literally the Genesis godly trigger thing and you can't target their card. But yeah, you can literally instantly trigger this card's ability and its power. And then against Protect and Accel, it makes a really good number by itself, which is 17, because it gets 3,000 when it's first played, so it becomes 12, and then it becomes 17 automatically, or automagically, I should say, because your opponent doesn't have a front row in the same row as it. So it becomes 17k, hit like a front trigger or something like that, becomes 27. Things get really wacky in general. So it's a really good number for Accel and Protect, and then it can hit Force basically, which is good. We always want to play cards in Accel that hit Force and are able to hit Force for any kind of number that will hit, preferably 18k or higher, but if we can take higher than 13k, we will as well, just so that we don't have to deal with stuff like Reckless Dragon that only hits 12. So lastly, we're running 3 Excess Streak Dragon, because this card is a little harder to get off. It is a little more resource heavy. When this card is placed, you Counterblast 1 and Soul Blast 1, and then you choose one of your opponent's rear guards in the front row and bind it. And if you were able to bind a rear guard, then this unit gets plus 10,000 power. So it becomes an 18k by itself. Unfortunately, it's an 8k base, but usually I play this card on an Accel circle, so usually it doesn't matter. But there are those key times where we have to play it on a regular rearguard circle, and it becomes 18k for the turn, which is cool. But then after that, it goes down to an 8k base, and it has to be boosted. And the biggest thing that we can boost it with is pretty much like a Rising Phoenix or a Demolition Dragon. So if you can boost it by Demolition Dragon, that's pretty good because it's 18k. But if you have to boost it with Rising Phoenix, it has to be the turn that Rising Phoenix comes from the drop zone, and then it is a 19k. So either way, both of those boosters are really good numbers, but you don't really want to have this card on your regular rearguard circle if you can help it. That's just my personal opinion. But it does hit 18, like I was just saying about Dragonic Deathscythe and Reckless Dragon. They don't hit 18 by themselves. This card can hit 18 by itself, so this card is really, really good against Force in your Force matchups. So be sure to use that wisely. Moving on to our grade 1s, we have probably the best grade 1 in the entire deck, Rising Phoenix. So the reason why this card is so good is because it literally makes it good for you to hold this card in your hand and guard with it as if it were just a regular 10k shield like an old trigger. And then it will literally revive itself from the drop zone like its name states, Rising Phoenix. The old Rising Phoenix didn't even have a revival skill, so this is just really, really good, especially for V-Series. Because a lot of times I treat this card like it's just, once it touches my hand, I treat this card like it's disposable guard. Because you want to guard with this card first out of all the cards that you have at your disposal to guard with, because that will turn into pressure for you when you use its ability. Anyways, getting to the ability, when it's in the drop zone and when your opponent's rearguard is bound during your turn, you can call this card a rearguard circle, and if you do, it gets plus 3,000 power. So it comes with 11k base, which can't hit anything by itself, which sucks, but it does help you fill your rearguard circles and fill your columns so that you can actually hit numbers on Force, Protect, and Accel, all decks, basically. Really, really good card. Then we have our next grade 1 at 4 for Lizard Soldier Riki. So Riki, like I mentioned when I was talking about the Tonics Drill and it being ideal, you don't want your opponent to have back rows. You can't really help it if your opponent has a rearguard that is behind their Vanguard, because you can't move that to the front row in any way, because then in order to move that to the front row, you would have to swap their Vanguard with the booster, and you can't do that because you would be swapping their Vanguard or moving their Vanguard to the back row. So we don't even need to think about all that. There's a clear reason why you can't do that. But anyways, Riki's ability is when it's placed on Vanguard or rearguard circle, you Soul Blast 1. This unit gets plus 3,000 power until the end of the turn. And then you may swap all of your opponent's rearguards to the front row and back row. All of them change at the same time, and the units in the middle column cannot move, like I just stated. So I don't know why they made this card Vanguard Rearguard Circle, because personally, I don't think first turn that you really care. about moving a rear guard forward to the front row. Maybe in premium, if you like play this card, you move a card to the front row, and then you attack into it just to not give your opponent damage or something like that, damage denial. But other than that, I don't really see a reason. In standard, like, I don't really see a reason. Usually turn 1 is just ride, attack into your opponent. So, and since it's 8k and not 7k, there's no need for it to use the skill to gain power, because you would usually just hit them anyways. I guess if they ride like a 9k Vanguard or something like that, there's a possibility that you can use it, but I don't really think so. Usually I use this card in the mid to late game when I'm just riding like Tonics Drill over Tonics Stinger and I'm trying to clear the board. I usually clear their front row with the grade 2s and Tonics Stinger skill that I have on the board, whatever I can. And then the remaining back row units, if I can blow them up, then I play Riki from my hand and use it to move it to the front row and blow their cards up. If I can't blow their cards up and bind them, then I just hold Riki in my hand, because then you lose the shield when you play Riki down on the board. You lose a valuable 10k shield. And this is an Accel deck, which means that we don't get that much hand advantage to be able to defend ourselves. So we want to hold back as much as we can if we can. Then moving on to our next grade 1, we have we have 2 Demolition Dragon. So Demolition Dragon is one of those cards that you can play as 4 of if you want and just replace Regina. But I think Regina comes in handy too often in some clutch situations against Force. So that's why I still keep the Reginas in there. Also, Demolition Dragon, its real ability that's good is like the second one, and it has to be on Vanguard Circle for that one, which is less ideal because you only get 1 turn of doing that, and if you go first, then you can't even really use this card to full potential. That's why I run 2. That way, if we get it and we happen to get it off, it's a bonus, but if not, it doesn't matter. But yeah, the rear guard ability is when your opponent's front row has no rear guards, this card gets plus 3,000 power. So notice it doesn't say when it attacks or anything, it's continuous. So it does become an 11k booster, which I actually misquoted that earlier. I thought that it was 7k, became 10k. I was thinking of the old Demolition Dragon, the Eradicator one. But both of these cards, Rising Phoenix and Demolition Dragon, both become 11Ks. So boosting Excess Streak, they would be 19K. And boosting these other cards, they'd be like 23, which makes these make really good numbers when they're boosting Recklessness Dragon and Dragonic Deathscythe after they've used their abilities. Because on Force, this will be 28K boosted by a Demolition Dragon or Rising Phoenix, and this would be 23. So that would be really, really good against Force. And like I said, the secondary ability is when its attack hits a Vanguard and it's on Vanguard, then you draw a card. So you can get a little ahead of your opponent just by going second, riding this card, attacking your opponent, letting it hit. But like I said, all of those situations need to line up, and it just doesn't that often. Plus, I want to go first, and since I want to go first in this deck, like, there's no need to run multiple, you know, like a lot of Demolition Dragons if I never plan to get it off. So next, let's talk about our 2 Dragon Dancer Regina, the card that I said comes in real handy against Force. It has an activation skill that says if your opponent has 1 or less rear guards in their front row, you can put this card into your soul. 3 of your rear guards get plus 5,000 power. So this does have a double purpose. Not only does it increase 3 of your rear guards powered by 5,000 and enabling you to hit Force most of the time on their 13k base, this card also goes into your soul and fuels your soul for like Soul Blast costs. Like, you have really heavy Soul Blast usage in this deck between Dragonic Deathscythe and Excess Streak. So you do want to be able to fuel your soul as well so that you're able to use these Soul Blast abilities. And since you can use this during the main phase, you can play one of those cards and use their abilities after you use Regina's skill. So really, really good. Moving on to our grade 0s, we have our regular starter, which is Spark Kid Dragoon. He got a little swag on him now. From the V series, he used to be our grade 3 searcher, but now he just draws us a card like every other starter. So pretty basic. And then we run 6 front triggers, 6 draw triggers, and 4 heal triggers. So the reason why we run fronts, I've seen a lot of builds of Narukami that run crits, and the Bushiroad recommends that you run crits. I actually disagree, just because if you have a full layout of Narukami cards on your front row, you want to be hitting front triggers in my opinion. And like I say, every single Accel video that I make, you want to be running front triggers if they give you the ability to, because it's great on the offensive and it's great on defensive. It also puts your opponent into very, very bad situations when they're at 5 damage and you check a front trigger. But if you check a crit, that's just one bigger attack that they have to guard. But if you check just one front trigger, then the entire turn's guard changes, and sometimes you can just kill your opponent off of checking one front trigger when you need to. So also that really helps Tonics Drill's restand. So like let's say that Tonics Drill is 22, you check a front trigger, it's 32, and then it attacks for 37 after that. Then you have cards like this, Tonics Stinger, that are on Accel Circle, they're 27, they become 37. You have Great Composure Dragon against Accel, like let's say that they have 4 open rearguard circles, it goes from 32 to 42. So the numbers get really ridiculous when you check fronts. As well as everything else in your front row going up. Let's say that you could only play Rising Phoenix and Demolition Dragon in your front row, and then your other 2 Accel circles in the front row actually can hit, but these can't. If you check a front trigger, both of them can now hit, versus you just checking a draw trigger, heal trigger, or a crit trigger, and only one of them can hit, the one that you choose. And that's if they don't check a damage trigger. So this gives you the ability to check double front sometimes, and if you check that, that's just busted, but really, really good. Self-explanatory, really. 6 draws, like I said before, because we always want to have cards to discard for Tonics Drill. We also want to see our pieces, because there's no draw engine in this deck, so the draw engine is our draw triggers. Because there's not really any cards that say draw a card except for Demolition Dragon, which is inconsistent, like I already mentioned. And then we have 4 heals. Pretty basic. If you don't run 4 heals, you're wrong, in my opinion. You're wrong. All of you are wrong. But moving on to our games, we are going to be loading up Narukami game 1. So first game we're playing against Kagura, a perfect example that I made before of a Great Composure Dragon against Waterfall. Although I don't believe we did that in this game. So our opponent rides Berserk, plays a board and some boosters, attacks us. We take both attacks, no big deal. We do get a Dragonic Deathscythe, so we're able to bind his card and punish him for being aggressive. We do check a heal as well, putting us ahead by a considerable margin, just because, you know, he extended so much. And he's basically doing it again by calling double Nahalim to the front row after we bound one of his cards. We do check a front trigger, and then we just take his damage because we don't really care. We ride Stinger, and we call the Phoenix, and we call our other Stinger just to bind that other card, and we call Great Composure to use as a rear guard. We attack the Vanguard, and his Vanguard is 17. He guards for 2. We check another heal, putting on Great Composure, and then we attack for 21 and attack for 32. Our opponent plays another Waterfall, and then he just attacks us regular, which I was actually kind of confused about because he decided not to use the skill. I even asked him if he wanted to use the skill, but I guess it didn't matter. So he attacks us with his rear guard. We take it because we did heal the previous turn. We ride, and then we use Riki to move the card up. We bind it, like I said, perfect scenario, and then our card is 22. He guards for a 2 to pass, and then our card restands for 27. He guards for a 1 to pass, but it's still too much for him to guard, because even though these 2 don't hit, the last card in his hand is a Waterfall, and he would have had to guard one 18k and then take our 27k, which was this crit trigger. So the game ends just like that on turn 2 of being grade 3. So like I said, this is a really aggressive deck. Really allows you to set up and use your opponent's board against them. Like you can see, like that Kagura player, maybe he wasn't overextending because he was using abilities to retire my field at the same time, but it just like we outsped him just because he, after a while, he had no rear guards to attack us with. Therefore, he could create no real pressure for us. But this next game we're playing against Murakumo, we unfortunately had to G-assist to get to grade 1. So we get rid of 2 cards, we drive check Riki. Then our opponent rides Left Arrestor and actually heals, so that's really good for him. And then we ride Recklessness Dragon, binding his grade 2. And then he has to G-assist to grade 3, and he gets Zangeki, which is another card from new BT04. This is on the BT04 patch. So we are playing against BT04 Murakumo. We check a draw trigger as damage, and then it is our turn. After our opponent uses his booster's ability, we use the Tonics Stinger to bind his front row. We play Great Composure just to set up a little pressure on the board, and we attack for 47, which we knew he was going to take, because if he doesn't, that's just ridiculous. We 2 to pass his Vanguard. He gets a draw trigger, which is perfect because he could just do 1 damage to us, but he attacked into Great Composure, which we're completely fine with letting go because Great Composure is like a card that's there for a bait pretty much. But we do check a heal trigger, restand, and he no guards, and we check a front. He checks a front as well, and then he uses the Shiryuki skill to make all of our cards in the front row go down by 10k when he guards, but then he just left the game. So I wasn't sure if he had no cards to guard, if he just couldn't guard it, or if he was just giving up. But now I see that he did have 3 PGs in his hand, although he would have had to guard with this, and so he hit a trigger, and then this would have gone down to 27 from what it was. So then he would have had to guard with 10k more, so he probably would have had to guard with this card and this card as his 10k, and then he would have had to PG the other ones, and he would have been in a really awful situation because I'm at 3 damage, and I don't think that he could win from that disadvantaged state unless he checked like double heal or something really lucky happened. But I really don't think that he could have won from that scenario where he quit, so it's kind of fine that he quit. And then moving into game 3, Narukami 3. Game 3, we're playing against Genesis, actually, which is pretty cool. Because I was mentioning how when you're playing against Artemis, it's actually a bad matchup for this deck, because once you get the godly triggers on their cards and you can't target them anymore, it becomes a really bad matchup for anything that can snipe cards. But fortunately for us, he's not running the Artemis build because people think that it's bad. So, hey, to each their own. We're playing against the better build to play against. But he uses the skill of his grade 2 to make his Vanguard go up by 3k. Then he uses Himiko to use the triple draw trigger effect to draw 3 cards, get plus 10 to the front row. So we ride Tonics Drill, we bind both of his front rows, and then we do have a riki, so we move his rear guard to the front row. And then we just attack, binding his card. We do check a double front trigger, so that's great. He does check a heal though, which is unfortunate for us. And then we check a draw on our 3rd drive check, so that's pretty OP. And then our opponent re-rides Himiko, uses all the abilities to make Himiko costless, uses the skill again for triple draw trigger, draws 3, and then he plays the grade 3 rear guard so that he can check his front row and put one, or check his top cards, which he checked double crit. And then I guarded that. We re-ride Drill again. We use Deathscythe to bind his front row. And then there's nothing else really I could do. I wanted to keep cards in my hand, so we just attack Vanguard with Drill skill, attacking for 12. He guards for a 2 to pass. We restand at 17. Then we check no triggers, which I guess is fair because we checked triple triggers the first time we did that. He re-rides Himiko again, and then he's not able to do the skill, so he just attacks with Himiko this time. I was thinking about it, and I could 2 to pass this card while guarding if he hit a crit. So he did just hit a draw trigger, which is good for us. And then he attacks into us, and then we literally just call 2 cards because we have more attackers than he has cards in his hand. So we do check a heal trigger and a front trigger, and he just takes the damage and loses. So like I said, playing an aggro deck like an Narukami is all about knowing your advantage, knowing the board state, knowing how many cards your opponent has in their hand, what they can survive, what they can't survive, and knowing how to kill them and how to rack up the game. But that has been the FutureFight Vanguard video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like on the video. Comment down below letting me know your thoughts on the deck list and the deck, and if you're going to be playing this when the Miyagi Academy set comes out. Also, I now recently have some more sponsors on another end that are not dabbers. So if you guys are watching this to the end of the video and you need case splits, or you need to buy cases for future sets or anything like that, be sure to definitely hit me up via the Facebook page, because I can get those case splits to you guys and get the cases to you guys at really, really good prices and like really on time with the set. So be sure to look out for that. But with that being said, this has been Josh from Cardfight Empire, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Bye, guys. Bye, guys.